All right, I am recording. I am also
recording Riverside, right?
I'm recording Riverside, and I'm recording in Audition.
Oh, which reminds me, I was going to try to record in Audacity. Let me see if it actually works.
Yeah, sure. What the hell?
See what it does.
Record everything. The more things we record, the better. So, Josh, how was your first trip to Leadville, Colorado? How was breathing?
It was a great trip. I really enjoyed myself. Breathing was hard.
Yep.
And I even did a bike ride while I was there, which is not something I do very often. Not at altitude. So to be on my bike for the first time in like 2 months at 10,000 feet or 11,000 feet was
what kind of ride? Gravel road, mountain?
We did a gravel ride. I cannot remember the name of the road, but yeah, I don't have a computer or Strava or any of that. But Travis, who was with me, I think we went 1,500 feet up, and it took like close to an hour, and then it took us like 9 minutes to get back down.
Gravity is our friend.
It was pretty crazy, but but
up there are no rides where either on the way out or on the way back you are not going to have a lot of climbing. There's not a lot of flat in Leadville. Everything's up and down.
Yeah, no, it was beautiful.
Had he hit me up for a ride, Fatty, I would have taken him out the pipeline. Like you can ride out there and not get significantly gassed. And it's beautiful out there, too. I mean, that's a pretty section of the course, and you can it's gravel bike worthy. Mrs. Hottie rode a gravel bike out there, so
I'm wondering if that was...
You can go, get off-road, get in the trees, and not get
We
killed.
started from the expo at like 4th or 5th Street or whatever that is, and basically rode up that street or one over from it, and it just kept going and going, and it was beautiful, but it just we just kept going up.
You know, that is the area where a lot of the Leadville Marathon, which is an off-road marathon, actually goes up to. And I was kind of unfamiliar with that even existing up until Lisa did all of that as part of the whole lead challenge a couple of years ago. And while I was out there, it kind of became astonishing to me that Leadville does not have a major gravel race, and that surprises me. There is a lot of good gravel out there. I mean, there's what Hottie was talking about, the stuff between Pipeline and Twin Lakes and that area, and there's a lot more than just that is part of the Leadville 100 course. There are lots of intersections. Hottie and I each got lost in the same place in Leadville last couple of weeks ago, and there is I don't know why there isn't with all of the runs and rides and mountain biking races, why there isn't a big gravel race. I'd be surprised if within the next couple of years there isn't one.
Yeah, I'd agree, except for the town, which has already started to say
it's at its limit.
We're starting to get enough of this. It's become, they've reached an impact zone there, kind of a saturation point with the locals, that adding another race to the summer calendar would be challenging.
Interesting.
So, but
there's
rumblings that they want to add to the field.
Yeah, but it's got to have an immense positive financial impact on the town. But I do get driving the town crazy with.
Yeah, and especially the bike race, because bike racers. First of all, we bring a lot more gear and people to the town. There's 1,500 people in the race, plus their crew. We're noisier. We go to the bathroom in the wrong places. We probably look funnier than runners, right? So I think we're if you're looking for an area that needs the most mitigation, it's probably the bike race stuff. It's probably the one that drives the locals up the wall more than any of them.
Yeah, but a race doesn't have to be 1,500 people, right? And a race doesn't have to be 1,500 people.
No.
You could have a bike race that is 350 people. That's the size of the stage race. The couple of weeks before, it hardly makes a dent in, I would imagine, in impact in the town. But it's I'm more interested in what kind of gravel bike were you riding?
I was on my 3T with Dura-Ace, and I had some WTB. I can't remember what the tires are, but actually looking around,
Horizons
they're over there. But yeah, no, it was nice. It was a great ride. It was beautiful gravel road, smooth, a little washboardy in some sections that you noticed on the downhill. But no, it was lovely riding.
Any heart rate monitor on?
No, God, no. I don't use any of that crap.
But
wax chain, yes.
Well,
650B,
clearly, yeah.
650B.
No, it is funny though. I kind of wishing I had the heart rate monitor, because you could tell pretty quickly. I felt good for 5 minutes, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, I'm pegged. I go slow down a gear. No, still pegged. Down a gear.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, I'm basically at a walking pace, and I am still absolutely pegged. My heart rate. Yeah, this sucks. So
yeah, people have that experience when going up a flight of stairs in Leadville. I mean, that's one of those moments that I don't think I will ever forget. First time in Leadville. Hotel room was on the second floor. I go up the stairs and I had to take a breather halfway up. Now I had a suitcase, and so I was carrying something up, but I was like, oh, I am in trouble. I'm going to be doing a 100-mile race in 48 hours, and I am pausing halfway up a flight of stairs. So,
goodness.
It is crazy. But
talking with a bunch of the cyclists about that too. When'd you get here? Yesterday. It was Adam Roberge and his mechanic stayed with us, and they got to town I think 14 hours before the race or something. It was that's good. All the best.
So that's actually the way to do it. Yeah, if you're not going to be there for 2 months, get there 12 hours before the race if you can do it. Otherwise, you're just getting tired, and all you're doing is getting
wearing yourself
progressively
out,
more tired. Yeah.
So you were having kind of an Ask Josh Anything live, meaning you were at a booth and people could walk by and ask you anything. I'm curious, what were people asking you at the booth?
We don't actually get a lot of questions now that you mention it.
Really?
So what really struck me was how many people wanted to come by and get a picture taken and say hi and talk about the podcast.
Really?
Or the YouTube channel. And I thought that was really cool. And the amount of people who came by to talk about hot wax was bonkers. I never expected that.
The Hottie effect.
I mean, truly, as we were setting up, one of the other vendors, the sticker guy, he's like, "Oh, you're here," and he's like, "You got to come see my RV." And I'm like, "What?" It's like he lives in this traveling motorhome selling stickers all over the country, and he had to show me he's got a dedicated chain waxing station set up in the camper.
Oh my gosh!
He's like, "You need to tell people that this is so good that it gets a dedicated space in my 300 square feet of living." Oh wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that says something. If you're living in a van and you're dedicating the same amount of space to bio necessities and wax, then that says something about the wax, right?
No, that was. But no, it was really it was awesome, and we had so many of the top pros and stuff hanging out in the booth wanting to talk about that. Or it was kind of funny. Travis from SILCA, who was with me, Nicky Terpstra was there, and he's like, "Oh, that's Nicky. Would he remember you from because we worked with him at Quick Step years ago?" And I said, "Oh God, I have no idea. Probably not." And he was talking with the Ceramic Speed guys, and they were giving him a oversized pulley system or something, and he turns around to walk away, and he's like, Josh! He's like, I love the podcast. And he comes over and he starts telling us about, it's like, oh yeah, I bought that ultrasonic cleaner and we're using, I mean, it was just, it was pretty awesome. Travis was like, dude, get your jaw off the floor. It's like, it's like, I can't believe I'm talking to Nikki about how he watches our YouTube channel and listens to the podcast and he's waxing his chain.
That is so cool.
But, it was cool. It was a really fun experience. And I got to meet you guys, for the first time, which is crazy.
Honestly, I almost overlooked you because, I mean, between the three of us, you clearly have the best hair.
Yeah.
And you were wearing a hat. And so I looked right by you. I was like, man, if I had hair like that, I would never.
We walked towards the booth, and I'm like, "Where's Josh?" In fact, he's like, "That's him right there." I'm like, "Where?" Right there, with the big wide straw hat on. I'm like, "What?" All right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and then we had to take off because it started raining. Like the second we saw you, we're like, "We got to go rescue our electronics."
The timing of that rain was terrible.
It did put a little bit of a damper on our attendance, I think, for that show, but.
Pun intended or not?
That is, yes, Leadville.
Yeah.
That's what happens there. It went out anyhow. People could hear it. Recorded version.
I think we ought to make a show. We going to make a show?
Yep, let's do the show.
Mm-hmm.
We don't make it, who will?
It's 2:30. I'm going to start bumping up into other things. If we don't get it done now, I'm going to have to leave 3/4
You're going to leave
through.
2:30? That would actually be kind of funny.
See you guys.
And this episode of Ask Josh Anything no longer has Josh. All right. We are recording, right? I'm recording.
Yes.
I think so.
On the other sources.
I'm recording in many, many ways.
My Audacity has little blips.
Sweet.
On the line. Okay.
Countdown?
Cool. Let's do it.
Yeah, sure. This is episode 80 of Marginal Gains. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I've kind of abbreviated the open here, too. Trying to just get this show moving a little faster. So, see how this goes. You guys won't even know until the show's out, so don't worry about it.
He said after 35 minutes of talking.
Yeah,
that's right.
Right. Okay, just like we talked about in the outline. We'll just dive straight in and pick up with more Leadville talk, which is great. This is the Marginal Gains podcast presented by SILCA, and this is the show that makes a dig.
It's a dig deal.
A big deal. It's going to live forever on YouTube, so. This is the Marginal Gains podcast presented by SILCA, and this is the show that makes a big deal about the little things and how those little things can be a big deal. I'm Michael Hottie. They call me Hottie, even though I'm not one.
Oh, don't say that.
Yeah, we are going to get to the bottom of that nickname one day, but in the meantime, I'm Josh Portner of SILCA. My nickname is Josh Portner of SILCA.
And I'm Eldon Nelson. My nickname's Fatty, and how accurate that nickname is varies from season to season, actually meal to meal. I would love it if I had been nicknamed the Cannibal, though. I mean, Eddie Merckx had the best nickname of all times. How do you get a nickname like that?
You win like
2 ways
more
I
than...
can think of, actually. One of them involves eating, Fatty, so it could be right up there.
The other involves your competition on European roads, right?
That's right.
Hey, in addition to SILCA, we also want to thank Shimano for backing this podcast. Shimano, well known for its innovations in drivetrains. They're the company that really brought electronic shifting to a wider audience. And, oh, by the way, Shimano's 105 group is 12-speed Di2, joining Ultegra and Durace in that family. Shimano also has sister brands. The company simply called Pro, where you can find saddles, bars, stems, bags, and more, and Laser helmets. Laser has recently introduced its own anti-rotational impact system called Kineticor. Fatty and I have been both wearing Laser, and we love the fit and feel.
Yep, truly favorite helmets ever. This is episode 80, and it is sort of an Ask Josh Anything episode. It's kind of like a Talk to Josh episode. Now, we almost recorded this episode in person in Leadville. The three of us finally met in person, but Hottie and I were deeply involved with our other show, and Josh's time was brief talking to real people in Leadville. So the best we could do was put Josh on our Leadville show, which was awesome. And you can find that episode over on leadville.fm. Josh, thanks for coming on to that show. It was awesome to finally meet you in person. So why did you go to Leadville?
Because you guys were there, of course.
That's a perfect reason.
Yeah, it just felt like the perfect thing to do, and we could all meet in person for the first time, which I think everybody I've told about that is shocked. Like, we assumed you've known each other for years. Like, oh no, we've known each other on our podcast for years, but never in person. No, but it was great too to just, as we've grown SILCA into these other categories, we have more off-road users, and I think we're going to continue to grow in that direction. So really just felt like a great opportunity to kind of meet our customers and fans and learn more about them and about the event, and also a little bit, hey, why not? I hadn't been at 10,000 feet in years. So.
Well, it's a place Fatty and I go to annually, and we suffer there annually. No oxygen. A lot of fun, though. Great community, great race, a lot of tradition there, so it's great to be around. So let's stick with this Leadville theme to kick off this show, and the town that's best known for elevation, at Little Town at 10,000 feet. They actually hold 3 bike races in town, all mountain bike, a 50-miler, a 3-day stage race, and the star of the show, the Leadville Trail 100, which is why Josh was there with Team SILCA. Actually, the Leadville Trail 100, not really a 100. The actual mileage is 105 miles. Josh, in our record show, we've talked a great deal about how going to higher elevation improves CDA. You cut through the breeze a lot better, but at a certain point, elevation works against the athlete's ability to sustain power, and many of those aerodynamic gains just are kind of thrown out the window. Leadville would, of course, be a prime example of that, actually an extreme example of that. However, men's winner, the Leadville Trail 100 winner, Keegan Swinson, certainly put some marginal gains to use in the area of aerodynamics. He blistered the course in 6 hours and a second.
Ow.
Setting the third fastest time ever. Now, Keegan donned a skin suit, and he had bar ins so he could narrow his hand position. He cut his bars down from 720 to 680. Man, I haven't seen sub 700 bars in a long time, so 680 is getting down there. I think I ride 760s. I think, Fatty, you're on the same.
780.
680. Yeah, that's quite narrow. I had heard, actually, he had experimented with drop bars on his mountain bike, but that didn't work out, so he went with these 680 bars. He also did something tricky with his number plate. He formed it into a semicircle to match the curvature of his bars. So some people do it kind of around the head tube area. They form it that way. He curled it so it formed around his bars. What else did he do? Well, he averaged 16.6 miles per hour over that 105 miles. And he hit 41 miles per hour coming down Columbine. So, yeah, if you can get low and get fast and wear a skin suit, you're going to move through that air a lot quicker. He posted on Instagram that his only thoughts were to stay small and stay on the gas. Good thoughts. Josh, we love to take cues from the fastest in the business, but remind us on, what speeds need to be achieved to take advantage of those aerodynamic gains, and how does 10,000 feet affect that whole calculation?
Yeah, so I guess to go back to how you phrased it initially, the beauty of our non-dimensional numbers, or like CD, CDA, which is a dimension number, but doesn't change with the altitude. So his CDA would be the same at all altitudes. That's one of the reasons we like that. But you are changing the air density, what they call rho, and of course that's just essentially how thick the air is as you punch through it. And so, yeah, there's these amazing charts that I think everybody, the handful of us who do what I do have, this, what is it, Simonette, Peroni et al., a famous research paper, where they basically have these kind of these graphs of like acclimatized versus non-acclimatized athletes going to altitude, and you can kind of on those charts pick, what percentage of VO2 max you're going to achieve at altitude. And then obviously we set that against the sort of speed improvements you're going to have with that reduced air density at altitude. Now, the burn of that, that works great for if you're trying to determine what altitude to set your hour record at. But of course, in an event like Leadville, everybody's at the same air density. So your marginal gains element of getting more aero is still key because it's all relative, to the guy next to you or in front of you or behind you. And these guys, they are going fast enough for this to really matter. It's unbelievable. 16.6 miles per hour average speed, and you're, you think you're climbing half the time and you're descending half the time, and so these guys are climbing fast enough that it probably matters a little bit. Not massive, it's not. And again, I haven't ridden the race course, but certainly the roads that I was on out there are steep enough that weight is your critical climbing, factor. But then on the downhills, the aero stuff obviously is, exponentially more important. And so, being the skin suit, the hand position, the narrower bars, that could be huge, especially once the race finally broke apart. And I can't remember, but he ended up on his own, 20-something miles out or whatever. And so I think at that point where you take away the benefit of the draft on the downhill, now you're in a situation where, having a lower CDA could be seconds to minutes on each downhill, right? And of course, some of the downhills here are really long. So, it could just be straight up minutes. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I like that. Stay small, stay on the gas.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
He went up the penultimate climb, which is Columbine, with a group. And when we saw him come down off the climb, and I was at the bottom, stationed at the bottom of the climb, he put 4 minutes into second place.
Wow.
So, and I heard that he dropped them, about halfway up. So obviously he got something on the climb, but then at 41 miles per hour and using his mantra there, clearly. And then from there, it's like 48 miles, 47 miles alone. Mm-hmm. And so obviously staying low, staying small, staying on the gas, keeping your number furled up, around your bars, that's all going to count.
Yeah, it's extraordinary to think about how, he missed breaking the course record in spite of the fact that the course is now 1.5 miles longer than when the course time record was set. That is something, right? Like where and how the course is longer. That's a whole podcast topic. You and I have talked about that a lot, Hottie, but that's meaningful, right? So, and when the course record was set, it was set by a team, right? The Ergon Topik team working together, as opposed to being truly time trialed by one guy by himself. And we are talking about a lot of the course where as he comes down off Columbine, where he's going to be using his brakes from time to time, he's got about 20 miles where it is more or less flat, and working with someone could make a difference of truly minutes. The fact that he came this close, man, what it makes you want to see is like, okay, we would love to see Keegan take another crack at this with a team helping him, and seeing exactly how fast a human being can do the Leadville 100. So, putting more marginal gains into play would be a lot of fun, just to see this. From my easy chair. It's just pretty remarkable. Now, he didn't just add marginal gains. Hottie talked about some of those. There were some things he did that would be counterintuitive, marginal gain wise, right? He actually went with a fatter tire with a lower TPI count. He was opting for a little bit more cush, a little more suspension with a 2.4 Maxxis Aspen ST, which is a tire available only to pros, and 120 TPI casing for a little more sidewall protection. Using the mantra that safe is better than stopped, and that ST is available to pros in 170 TPI His tires were at 19 PSI, which is harder than I would have expected. I don't know what his exact weight is, but I'm sure that he is in the 140s at most. And so that, to me, that seems high.
Well, he also rides a little more aggressive than you probably too. So
a
that's
lot.
Why
Yeah. He is a true mountain biker, right? He's able to fly over rocks in ways that, he flies through stuff that I pick my way through. He's running an insert on the rear for additional protection. His chain, of course, clean and treated. Amazingly, he had a 38-tooth front ring and a 1052 cassette. That gives him the ability to really run some big chain inches. Keegan also did something we have seen other pros do at Leadville, and that is wear road shoes, which makes walking a non-option. And there are places where I would say 85% of us do walk in this course. So, Josh, we would love to bring you to Leadville and ride that course and do some focus testing. Where would you look for gains? For someone like Keegan or for someone like me, even.
Oh gosh, just laughing thinking of the gear inch thing, that 38 tooth. It reminded me when we talked to Andy Hampston. Remember, and he said like we climbed fast because we had to.
Yeah,
it's like oh, it's either this or walk. And then you go to the road shoes, and now walking is not an option. So I guess your option is going fast. Yeah, I think it's a fascinating one for me, and I think I would almost certainly start with tires and pressures. We've talked so much about that in the past, but it's just always such a balancing act. Where and again, not knowing the course, anything like you guys know it, but you can truly pick up minutes in some sections, and you're probably doing something that could potentially cost you minutes elsewhere. And so I think it probably becomes a game of statistics to a certain standpoint of, okay, I've, it tires that big at that pressure. He's clearly, he's clearly assuming that he's making up time in the smooth, fast sections, and he's willing to lose a little bit of time in the, trickier, more technical, rockier sections where that's just, almost certainly too much pressure for someone of that weight. It's an interesting one though, and I think some of the most interesting ones are probably going to be what can we do. We had this conversation with quite a few of the pros there who were doing a lot of climbing test hardtail, versus full suspension, and the consensus we heard from I think 4 or 5 of them who were all kind of chatting together that they were all like, oh yeah, I'm definitely climbing faster on my hardtail, no doubt. And then the question becomes, okay, well, what potentially is that costing you somewhere else? And one of the guys we were chatting with, who I won't name, but it was quite funny. He's like, my sponsor only gave me a full suspension bike this year. And, I think that's the other side of it, right? So maybe if you're the person that only has the one, full suspension mountain bike, well, that will give you some more flexibility in your tire pressures, right? Because we know that you can run a, suspended tire a little bit softer than you can on a rigid with similar risk. And so, maybe there's some offsetting that you can do. But I think that what's so fascinating about an event like this is every single choice that finds benefit somewhere is costing you something somewhere else. And so it really comes down to, kind of making that Pareto chart of, okay, here's my biggest decision to make, and I got to make it correctly, right? Here's my second biggest decision to make, because some of them are, particularly for the folks at this pointy end of the race, skin suit, that's an easy one, right? I mean, there's almost no downside to a skin suit other than you can't carry stuff in your pockets with it, but that is not what they're worried about, right? They have other concerns. Things like the number plate, do we bend it this way or that way? You could test for that, but it's probably something of a wash. The answer is just bend it one way or the other. You're probably good. I think there's a great opportunity to hide cables or get rid of cables, or, we talked with a lot of, people about dropper posts, and that's an area that I don't have a ton of personal experience in, but it's pretty easy to look at and go, oh, it's a lot of weight when you're climbing that's not doing you anything on the climb. So how often are you using it, and what benefit is it really giving you on the descents? And I think to some extent that's a bit of a personal preference, right? Mm-hmm. I know, I think it was Jeremiah was saying like, oh yeah, I think it's a huge benefit on the descents, even on the less technical ones. Like I would say run it. And, we had some other pros there who were saying, oh, absolutely not. Like it's just not technical enough here to, and again, so there's probably that personal style piece that comes into it. And, I don't know, my biggest advice here for, would be, and what we told all these guys too, is just like, do you have a notebook? You need a notebook. Because right. I think that, it's complicated and we forget about this stuff. And I think, if you're doing this race every year or you're doing a bunch of races through the year, man, like just being able to look back and go, oh yeah, crap, I forgot about that aspect of things. Or, oh, they changed that part of the course, that really rocky section isn't there anymore. Oh, well, that's going to change, that's going to change my tire pressure, or maybe that, that section that I wanted the dropper post for isn't in the race anymore. Or they added a section that I haven't ridden yet, right? What is that going to do to me? So I would honestly say for a problem like this, where I have really very minimal personal experience, optimizing, man, get a notebook and a good pen.
Yeah. Well, Keegan did not run a dropper. And Keegan also ran, one of the reasons he ran those wider tires, like the other gain he could have picked up on here, is sticking with the 2.2s, which he ran the year before. He also won in 2021, by the way. So the 2.4s were just him saying, look, I'm in this Lifetime Grand Prix now. I need to make sure that I preserve my first place in here. Like, getting a flat could really mess things up for me for the overall. So we opted for a little more protection, just to, not so much for this race, the LT100, but for the overall, for the bigger picture he's looking at.
Yeah.
I mean, that's some of the thinking there. Obviously, then he's left some stuff on the table where he could easily find some gains if it was all about the Leadville Trail 100, all about going fast there. But it's not. There's some, thousands of dollars on the line for this overall Lifetime Grand Prix series. We also want to congratulate Hannah Otto, the women's winner. She did run a dropper, by the way, and won the race on a bum shoulder. Like, she was seriously injured, but managed to stick in the race and win the damn thing. Also, congrats to SILCA athlete Alexei Vermillion. Alexei came in fourth. Alexei's more of a roadie style, I would say, but has been doing great work on the mountain bike. And he's third in the Lifetime Grand Prix Series. So congrats to Alexei. Keep up the good work there. We also saw my man crush, Nicky Terpstra, in Leadville. He's the winner of Flanders, winner of Roubaix. That's why I love him so much. He was giving Leadville a go, thanks to Lawrence Tandam, kind of talking him into this mess. He came in 21st, so all right, way to go there, Nicky. I think Nicky was a little more comfortable at SBT Gravel the next day on drop bars, but it was cool to see Nicky out there.
I will say, Hottie, or to our listeners, listen to, and cross-plugging a show here, but episode 25 of the Leadville podcast from this last season has Hottie with a 2-minute interview with Nicky very shortly after the race, and it is a delight. Just this man who is, we're used to seeing do superhuman things, being absolutely demolished, and has such obvious lung burn that he is barely able to get a couple of words out. It makes those of us who appreciate Leadville, be able to point to something and say, "Look what it does to Superman over here."
Yeah, no, it's quite impressive. We laughed that Nicky, he actually dropped by our booth the day before the race, and he's a big listener to the podcast. So,
awesome.
So Nicky, it was awesome seeing you since you're listening, and he's a big fan of the Chain Spa, which I thought was pretty awesome.
Hottie.
I love him even more.
You should have. You two could have had so much to talk about.
He was talking a lot about his ultrasonic cleaner and his wax setup. So I think you two could Do that interview again, mention the chain spa, and I think it becomes a 25-minute interview. But no, just such a total class act. I mean, I just really, really have to appreciate and respect him. I mean, just such a nice guy. And it's funny, you mentioned SILCA athlete Alexei Vermeulen. You know, technically we only are in it to sponsor Willie the Wiener, which is Alexei's dog. Yeah. And if you're listening and you're not familiar, rides in a backpack with him, and you have got to see this dog. He's on Instagram at Alexei's page. But I mean, Alexei, that guy blew me away. He came in, hung out in the booth, talked to customers, talked to people about product. Had the dog that just chilled out. I've got a picture. He made like a nest kind of in amongst the chain lube on a little table that we had. And I mean, just lovely folks. And I think that's one of the things I really love about, bike racing in general, but I think particularly events like this is that, there really is the community, and it's not, it's not everybody hiding out back at their hotels with their feet up. I don't know. Yeah. Doing their own thing. It's like there's real community. And I mean, at one point, I think we had 6 or 7 of the top 10 people, like all hanging out in front of our booth, just chatting about stuff, and it was awesome to see other riders come by, and they'd kind of look and be like, oh my God, that's what a crew you've assembled. And, and I mean, and they're not like our athletes per se. They're just hanging out, talking about stuff, and I just love the community feel of it.
Yep. The athlete nerd community. It is something special. I mean, Hottie, you and I have seen a couple of years ago, not that long ago, Jeremiah Bishop standing in the booth when he was a serious contender for the race 24 hours after that, standing in the booth for hour upon hour, I think actually fitting athletes for their bikes, talking with them about anything that they wanted to. And he wasn't doing that, necessarily just because he was a sponsored rider. He does it for the love of the sport. And also should mention, Josh and Jeremiah were on stage at the same time, had a lot of conversation in our episode 24 at the Expo. I don't mean to be cross-promoting our other shows so much, but honestly, I mean, you were there, Jeremiah was there. We got to get Jeremiah on this show, because I think you two have a lot of marginal gains to talk about. But one more Leadville thing, and this one's about me, and honestly, I swear I will not spend too much time on it. But so I rode on a 3419 single speed, right? And I had a couple of questions on that. So I struggled in the decision between a 20-tooth cog and a 19-tooth cog. Eventually going with the taller gear, because in a couple of weeks earlier, I had found myself kind of spun out kind of often. From a marginal gains perspective, good call or bad call?
Oh gosh, I don't know how to answer that. To me, I love single speed, but it also, like, the reality of single speed is it's just the wrong gear always. And so, it's probably back to our percentages game. Are you, how wrong is it how much of the time versus how less wrong is it for what percentage of the time?
Maybe I could recast that question as, how could I tell what the right gear is for me? Having been on a 20-tooth cog for a big chunk of the stage race and feeling spun out, but also being aware that a 19-tooth cog would mean I'd have to get off and walk a little bit sooner and perhaps a little more often. So I'm aware of the trade-offs, and that's sort of been a topic in this episode anyway. But where is the sweet spot for that trade-off? Is there a marginal gainy way that I could make a more informed decision instead of what I essentially did, which is go by my gut and a little bit of experience from the previous week?
I think if we were really to game it out, you would probably want to ride the course with one of them, and then do some sort of kind of scatter plot analysis of cadence, and then really look at, thinking of things like, and say you're planning to race for the win, right? So, okay, where are there likely to be like critical moves happening, critical attacks going? Oh, they're going to be, this part of this climb. Okay, well, what was my cadence there? Oh, well, if, I'm at 65 cadence at that moment, is that, what sort of situation is that going to put me in? My personal, I tend to, I would say, overgear it a little bit rather than undergear, because I'd rather mash than be a little bit spun out. But sometimes, your feel of those things can kind of lead you a little bit astray, So I don't think you need to necessarily say pick both and do it back to back, but maybe pick some of those critical places where you think, okay, I really want to be comfortable and optimized here, right? Or I really want to be able to respond to an attack, or make my move here, and then, make your decision based on that.
So is this mostly a placebo / nocebo question that I'm asking anyway? I mean, to me, it feels like there is some difference, some feelable difference between 20-tooth and 19-tooth. But I mean, it's one tooth, right? The math says, well, that's 5%, right? It's going to be 5% harder on a climb. But I don't know if that's actually the way that it works out. Is there that much of a difference between 20 and 19?
There's enough of a difference that, if that were on your road bike, you would, you would shift the gear, right?
Sure.
Right. So I think, if you had that, 12-23 straight block and you were in a 19 and felt a little over geared, you'd go to the 20.
Yep.
But it is definitely one of those, kind of like, you guys know my issues with some of the bigger jumps in these modern cassettes, where you just, some of the jumps are too big, and then you can just kind of never find that sweet spot. And in some ways, to me, a lot of single speeding feels like you're often stuck in that, right? Like you're going into it up front knowing that I'm going to have to pick a gear that's going to be the wrong one for like at least half of this event.
Maybe
but
three-quarters.
It is 3/4. Yeah. Well, and really because I think of how critical these decisions are on the track, right? And the track really doesn't have a climbing and descending. I mean, other than in some really small ways. And this can be a big deal. And so, I think there's, without a doubt, it extrapolates out over the course of 105 miles to be, to be a big deal. But yeah. I think the key to me, from a placebo, nocebo thing, I think you probably want to game this out and do a little bit of testing on it, if for no other reason than to keep your mind from playing tricks on you during the event, where you're negative self-talking yourself into some bad place, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that is where it starts. How many minutes? If you were to say how many minutes difference in my finishing time in a 20 versus a 19, hell, I don't even know how to begin solving that problem for you. But if you're really struggling on the climbs that day, and you chose the 19th, then every time you're climbing, right, hours and hours of climbing, you're going to be in the back of your mind going, damn it, I so picked the wrong gear. I should have been in the, that's probably, truthfully, probably more detrimental than the one tooth. You know, like if we had you do hill climb repeats up and down over a couple teeth difference, it's probably seconds, but you negative talking yourself for an hour, that's probably minutes.
I think you actually hit the nail exactly on the head with that. For me, it wasn't even the climbs or descents. That I understand on a single speed. The negative self-talking happens on the flats when I'm spun out. I did this in the stage race with the 20-tooth, And I spent so much time going, I'm spun out. Everyone is going by me. Everyone is going by me. I wish I had an 18 tooth, and so forth. Well, I could compromise on a 19, and I'm having that conversation. Even though I was still spun out a lot of the time on the flats with the 19 tooth, I wasn't having that, that negative self monologue going on as much. So
yeah, good. Then I'd say you made the right decision.
I mean, if it feels like it. Hard to say, but it worked for me. One more single speed question, and then I swear, Hottie, I will let you talk again. This one has to do more with chain line, right? And this is definitely more of a true marginal gain question. When you are setting up a single speed, should I be getting out the calipers? Should I be getting super precise with that chain line? Are there gains or losses that I might be getting by a spacer here or a spacer there, trying to get things exactly measured out?
A perfectly straight chain line is a big deal. I mean, we definitely see this on the track. I mean, a couple millimeters one way or the other, it's fractions of a watt, without a doubt. I think the flip side of that is, we can certainly look at chain efficiency testing in different gears or different gear positions and look at, if I'm in 11 speed and I move one cog to the left or right, assuming it's the same size, what's that costing me? It's a few tenths of a watt. And that, when you look at it, that's a fairly big jump, right? Like it's pretty unlikely that your chain line in a single speed is going to be off by one cassette position. So I would say if you've got the tools, lasers, and get it as close as you can get it. I would imagine with calipers and your eye, and you're going to be plus or minus a millimeter, and I think at plus or minus a millimeter we're going to be. There's some theoretical marginal gain there, but having looked at a lot of these things in a lot of ways, if we've got equipment that's repeatable within a tenth of a watt, I can't say that you can find a repeatable gain or loss of plus or minus a millimeter. So whatever's there is less than a tenth of a watt.
Mm-hmm. Well, you had me buy a laser.
Input, so. Definitely. I would buy the laser just
to have the laser.
Starters. I own a ton of them, and I recommend. I think everybody should have at least one.
They're great for
even if you don't care about your chain line, get a laser.
Get the cat some exercise, right?
That's right. But.
All right, well, that should wrap up our Leadville discussion, I think, for this Marginal Gains podcast, hopefully for the year. Maybe for the year. We'll see. We'll see how this goes. For the folks who were in Leadville, though, one of the companies they definitely got familiar with is the Feed. Now, Fatty and I have gotten to know the Feed since the beginning of our other podcast, as the Feed has sponsored it for all 5 seasons. The Feed has also got this great custom bottle program going that some of our listeners took advantage of. So a lot of good reasons to love the Feed.
Yeah, definitely. What you need to know is the Feed will take care of all your nutritional needs, no matter what kind of athlete you are. You don't have to go to Leadville or go on Hottie's in My Group Ride. The Feed is the largest online marketplace for athletes to shop sports nutrition, high-performance supplements, recovery gear, everything you need to make your workout as good as it can be. That's right. It's all online, not in person.
Now, the Feed has all the stuff you would expect from a company that calls itself the Feed, and they do a great job of marketing outlets like this one. What was that? I don't know what the hell that was. Let's try it again. The Feed deserves better. Okay. Now, the Feed has all the stuff you would expect from a company that calls itself the Feed, and they do a great deal of marketing on outlets like this one. They have bars, gels, drink mixes. They even have recovery tools like foam rollers, massagers, and those big leg compression balloons that Fatty likes to lounge around in. The Feed also has a wide range of vitamin-type supplements, the little things you lose as an athlete and certainly want to replace.
Yeah, they are called the Feed formulas. They're personalized for you and based on your needs as an athlete. They come in a nice little daily pouch that is easy to take with you when you travel. And this is cool. The first time you order the feed formulas, you get 50% off, which is a very good deal. So be sure to check out the feed formulas and the incredibly broad and deep array of nutrition and supplements for athletes at thefeed.com.
All right, like we said, the Leadville discussion is wrapped up, but we're going to stick with the single speed discussion, actually fixed gear discussion here. Some cool racing news, and that is that the hour record, one of our favorite topics on Margin for Gains, has been broken by a guest of this podcast, and that is Dan Bigham. Josh interviewed Dan this year. Dan took the record off Victor Campenarts by covering 55.548 kilometers at the Tissot track in Switzerland. And Dan's record is amazing because, you know, he is a good cyclist. There's not about that. But you don't see him pushing those 400-plus megawatts that you see out of some of these powerhouses. What Dan is, though, is a very smart guy. He's an aerodynamicist who used to work in F1 and now consults Team Ineos. And he is slippery. In testing, Josh, I heard he produced a CDA of .15. So Dan really puts his mind to this thing, and congrats to him. What did you take away from Dan's hour record?
Oh, gosh, yeah, I think it was brilliantly, clearly brilliantly prepared, planned, and I think most importantly executed. If you, those listeners who haven't heard the show, I mean, go back and we listen to my interview with Dan. We talked about his previous attempt at the hour record where he broke Wiggins' record, but just barely didn't beat Campenarts. But yeah, I mean, I think a couple things here of note, right? I mean, this Tissot track in Switzerland is nowhere near as high as Aguas Calientes or some of the other velodromes he could have gone to, so it's a pretty low altitude track. His CDA, I mean, I can believe 1.5, and we can do some math on another show, maybe analyze this record a little bit more in depth. One of the challenges is they're being very coy about the whole thing. So it's like, we know it happened. We saw some feed. I think there's been one sort of photo at this point of the bike, because the bike's a prototype and they're trying not to talk much about it. But you know, a CDA 1.5 is close to what's necessary to make this happen. You know, Dan is not a world tour cyclist, but he is in his own right one of the most amazing track riders, I think, ever. You know, you look at his history. So I mean, the guy is a machine, and he knows how to ride the track. And I think when you put that with, you know, the aero weenie, I think as he calls himself, obsession, you can produce records like this. And I think, you know, this makes me, I think, extra excited because it points to so much of what we talk about in this show, and so much of what I've spent, I think, my career trying to sell people on, for lack of a better word, is, you know, it's not all about being able to do 500 watts for an hour. And you know, these other things are really critical. And in some cases, you know, you have potentially an athlete who can't make the 1 hour power that another athlete can make, but by doing all these other clever things, you know, putting the rest of the package together, they can take the hour record. You know, it really speaks to the balance of the whole thing. It's not just about being a big, 1 horsepower motor in a human, and going out and killing it. It also has to be it's a thinker's game. And, and I think this proves it. I mean, kudos to him. I think the other thing I will hit on is, and we can post, to the show notes, but Javier Disley, Aero Coach, has a great Twitter feed, and he does these beautiful scatter plots of the lap times, or laps. I think he does them as speeds, for all the hour record attempts. And, you know, when I talked to Dan last time, I said, wow, you had the best negative split strategy I had ever seen. And if you look at the one from this attempt, it's an even better negative split strategy. You know, I mean, he starts out really quite slow.
Yeah.
For one of these, and just
he was going
and just builds his way faster, and then in the last 15 minutes, I mean, he's just flying, and it really looks completely different from almost any other way people attack. Typically people try to hold the previous record with the hope that they're going to go faster at the end. And what happens when you look at those charts is that they kind of run along in a straight line and then they slowly just fall off at the end. And that's where people start to miss. And with this negative splitting strategy, you're going slower and then you're just slowly getting faster and faster. And, at whatever, 30 something minutes, he breaks even and then he starts putting the time in. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, plot of how the race went down. And, and I think that's one of the pieces that people in some ways forget about. These guys do not have access to their power data and they do not have access to their speed data. And so they are once a lap getting a single piece of information, which is the time of the previous lap. And so, it's so mentally, it's not just physically hard, it's so mentally hard for them to put the whole thing together. They're not staring at 350 watts or whatever. They're hearing, 15 seconds and going, oh, okay, I need to do 14.9 this next lap. Okay, now I need to do 14.85. Now I need to, right? It just adds a whole other level to this game, and I think is where it really, really falls apart for most people who attempt it. And Dan, kudos. I mean, he just crushed it.
Yeah.
Just crushed it.
Great strategy. It's fine to have a strategy on paper, and he totally revealed it. He said, here's what I'm doing. But then he executed it. And I also read that he thought about head position quite a bit and line. And based on, it was a Facebook feed, the video was, but it looked like his line was very consistent. Like he stayed as close as he could to the pads and rode a beautiful line. So, yeah, while not a 400-plus watt guy, he does all those other things great. And some of those are athletic things. Like negative splitting that's an athletic thing. Like being able to control your body that well, your mind that well, that is an athletic thing. So Dan is, obviously got the engineering know-how and a lot of brain power behind this thing, but ultimately it was him and his body that pulled it off. So congrats to Dan. Again, go back and listen to Josh's interview with Dan, too. Good stuff there. Let's stick with the aerodynamic thing. And that is aerometers, Josh. A topic that's been bubbling. I started picking up on this a long time ago. Back in 2016, I think, was when I first ran into an aerometer, thanks to Argon and Nocio. And earlier this spring, I decided to do a little show on this with Michael Lieberzon. He's the host of Endurance Innovation Podcast. And he's had a lot of experience with aerometers, both just interviewing people and in the field, testing them as well. Again, one of those companies is Nocio. They're probably the most prominent at this point as far as having product out available on the market. And there's been a lot of discussion about real-time CDA, like can we deliver real-time aerodynamic data to a head unit so a rider can make an adjustment out in the field. And, we kind of concluded in that show that not so much. Like, that is a pretty far-fetched idea right now, and that's a lot of that's due to all the variables that you're dealing with to get to an aerodynamic number. To do that in real time, that is. Now, testing, being able to go out in the field and test with a product that you attach to your bike, and then later bring it in to a computer and crunch that data and be able to scrutinize the numbers that you're picking up on, whether that be yaw or whether that be rolling resistance or temperature change or all those variables that can throw off an aerodynamic number. That's another thing, and that's a little more realistic. So testing in the field with a product like that seems to be a little more within reach. So, again, finding a way to not be slave to the wind tunnel and take your bike out in the field and attaching a product, we're seeing some movement in this area. Slow, but it's happening. And, in fact, since the interview, Josh, a few more companies have come forward with products, with capsules you can put on your bike to get aerodynamic numbers. And, again, this narrative, though, of real-time CDA continues to be thrown out there. My question here, Josh, is what do you know about aerometers? Like, have these products crossed your path? Have you had a chance to look at them, deal with them? What are some of your thoughts on aerometers and what we could maybe reasonably expect out of them?
Oh gosh, yeah. So the company that built the very first aerometer ever was called Alpha Mantis out of Canada. Andy Francioni, super lovely guy, genius, listener of the show, was behind that product. And I think the first 2 of those they ever sold were bought by me back in my Zip days. And yeah, we actually used that product during our Firecrest development back, 2009, 2010, kind of in that range. I think we are still in the infancy of the technology, and I think it's a little reminiscent to me of the kind of early days of the power meter. There's still definitely an element of like, how do we use this? And I think a lot of the challenge now is, okay, we have this thing that's giving us data, but what do we do with the data, and how much can we trust it, and how big are the error bars, and what role does the athlete play in those error bars? I would describe a lot of the product out there at the moment as probably closer to datainment than something really truly useful and functional. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've worked with, certainly through our pro team and pro triathlon connections. I mean, I've worked with a lot of these devices, and I can't say I've been overly thrilled with any of my experiences there. But I think a lot of that comes from, they're all still set up in ways that you really have to control all of these other variables, probably to extents beyond which you can actually control them. I think in a way that's part of what's so brilliant about the Chung method, is that it's really built around taking fairly crappy data. Like, how do we make the best possible approximations with data that we assume is junk? And you can actually get some shockingly good approximations from this pretty simple tool. And a lot of these programs are trying to integrate the Chung mathematics in some way or another. But when you introduce some new sensitive tool, and of course everybody is super proud of the thing that they're trying to do, all of them have, in some way or another in the back end, some other like, oh, but you've got to control these variables really tightly. Like none of them that I think are doing really great jobs yet at thinking about differences in like rolling resistance. So they're kind of assuming that your CRR is the same. And of course it's not when you're out in the real world and you're going over different surfaces or almost over any distance of road. The CRR is going to be changing with time. So I don't know how many years out we are. I think, the next big hurdle to solve is somewhere in the math. And actually have a number of interesting conversations going with people who are working on trying to solve that. And I think it's more complicated than most people can probably imagine, but there are smart enough people out there. Robert Chung being one of them, and some people that he's introduced me to that are working to solve these problems. And, I think the question for me is more, is this technology going to have like a big breakthrough that suddenly makes it something useful in the short term? Or is this going to be one of those, kind of long, or continue to be, because it was 13 plus years ago that I would have bought that first Alpha Mantis Aero Stick. Is it going to continue to just slowly stair-step its way into something functional and usable, or is there going to be some breakthrough that's like, nope, this combination of sensors and this, combination of equations, and boom, it works. And from experience, I tend to think, my experience with these things, I tend to think it's going to be it's 10 more years of small stair steps. Mm-hmm. And then the question beyond that becomes, what really are we doing with it?
Right. Who needs it?
And is it a tool that you borrow or rent and use to kind of perfect your TT position and then take it off and that's your TT position? Is it something that's going to be small enough and aero enough and hidden away enough on the bike that you're going to keep it on for your time trial, and it's going to be reminding you to stop moving your head, right, or stop doing whatever you're doing that's ruining your CDA. I think time is going to tell us, but I don't think any of that at this point is yet clear. Not to me.
Well, from a racing standpoint, I could see some benefit, right? If triathletes at the highest level, time trialists at the highest level, UCI pro teams, right? You could see them using this and taking advantage of it. But Fatty and I going out for a group ride, do we need to know our aerodynamic data, whether it be after the fact or in real time? I mean, is that going to make our ride more enjoyable? Day attainment wise, sure. I mean, we might get a good laugh out of it real quick, but otherwise, geez, I don't know. So I love that word, by the way, data attainment. That's a beautiful one. I did see another interesting product get floated, Josh. I don't know if it's out in the marketplace yet, and that is one that would remind a rider, and maybe you can expound on this, or maybe you've seen other things like it before. For instance, if you were to go in a wind tunnel or do any type of testing and find your optimal position, your optimal head height, head tilt, all of that, and then the bike or there's a sensor on your stem or somewhere beneath you, and then one on your helmet or on your chest, and you can get instant data or instant notifications of when you're out of alignment. That seems a little more achievable, right? To suss that out and be accurate with it. It sounds like a good idea, at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I think back to the long ponytail helmet days. We used to do a thing with like Dave Zabriskie and a number of other guys, but we would literally take a toothpick and stick it in the foam in the back of the tail of the helmet, and then get the guys to like keep their head in a way that it was like poking them in the, like you need to feel that poking your back. and honestly, my dream was always to just like duct tape the tip of the helmet down or like stitch it into the skin suit in some way. And of course that's not legal.
Hook
for,
it in.
Safety and other
safety.
Like, no, you could not tape that guy's head in place. Like, but I mean, let's be honest. It's not worse than that specialized head sock nonsense, right?
Right.
But no, I think that makes a ton of sense, and I think back to the Italian pursuit team with the cable, the cable holding their chest down. We know these things work. People have used various cues and position things for years with success, and so I think to me that product, which I actually haven't seen, but it sounds like the electronification. I don't even know what word I'm looking for here, but
I like electronification. Let's go with that.
The making electronic of a mechanical thing that we've done for years, and that mechanical thing that we've done for years works. So I think there's probably I think there's probably a lot of sense to be made there.
Well, let's go from the obscure and abstract in here to the very pedestrian but also useful. New pump from SILCA, the Gravelero.
Oh, jeez.
Tell us about that.
Talk about marginal gains. So you guys know our Tatico mini pump.
Oh, yeah. I have one.
It's like won a bunch of pump shootouts, and like it's always the top of the pile. It's a good product. And the two things with it that are, I think one of them is obvious and one of them is quite funny. It will do 100 psi comfortably, which means that the diameter of the piston is just is not big enough to push huge air in a off-road tire. But the other one with gravel is that it's knurled. It's got this cool knurled look to it, and people don't like that it gets dirty and it's hard to clean because the dirt gets in the knurl. And so we kind of, as a joke, we're like, oh, well, I'm going to make a oversized Tatico and take the knurl off and call it the Gravelero for, gravel riders. And so we did it. And then in doing so, when it came to naming it, we're like, well, shit, we can't really think of anything better than that. And so what started as a joke essentially just became the product. But it is funny to explain to people like, yep, it's a Tatico that pushes more air and gets less dirty because of the knurling.
Well, do mountain bike tires?
That's important.
I mean, obviously we'll do a 40 or something like that. Mountain bike tires are good for that, so Fatty could put on his bike for the next Leadville Trail 100.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't, God, it's been, that was a COVID delayed, it became so hard to get tubing in COVID. So, I mean, honest to God, we designed that pump somewhere in like 2019.
Wow.
And I think I have like project management sheets somewhere, showing like I want to say like spring 2020 launch, that sort of a thing. And so it's funny that we finally have our first, we're making them as we speak. And I look back and think like, my God, it's a brand new product. And I feel like it's been in our product range since the beginning of time, because it's 3 years old in my mind. So I don't even remember all the specs on it off the top of my head. But yeah, it's just a 25% larger piston diameter. I think it pushes like 35 or 40% more air per stroke than a Tatico. And so, it's probably more like a 70 PSI max air pressure with, out killing your arms. So you're just putting in more with each stroke, but it's still a pretty compact little thing.
No, I am definitely going to get one. I am getting so that I do not like using the CO2 canisters as much as I used to. I used to be in love with those, but man, you always feel like you are taking a gamble with a CO2 can, right? If you don't nail it and you don't got a spare, you are in big trouble, and that is not true with the pump. So yeah, it's the excitement of this. I don't know how long ago we all started using CO2, but I think I'm about done with that. And it's pumps on everything again for me.
I'll tell you, SILCA actually had the first CO2 inflator for bicycle, and it was 1984.
Oh,
really? That long ago?
Yeah, it was one of the things that we learned in the history of the company. That 1984 is like the first appearance in a catalog, and the company was claiming in the catalog for that to be an industry first compressed air cartridge. So that's sad that I don't have like historical information all that much deeper than that, but yeah, so SILCA was involved in there. I'll tell you the other thing about CO2. I have not been a big fan of CO2 for a long time because it just feels wasteful, and we sell them, people want them, but personally, I just always have a pump, and it have always been that way. But I'll tell you, I have newfound dislike for sealant or for CO2 with the sealant thing, and it's interesting how it CO2 affects our sealant, but it also affects Stan's and Orange. Really, any natural latex sealant is essentially thickened and hardened by CO2. And so, I have a newfound dislike of using CO2 since we're pretty much all tubeless anymore.
Now, I had sort of noticed that CO2 plus sealant, they don't play well together, but I don't understand why. What is the interaction, the reaction that's going on?
It's essentially an acidification that's happening, and so you think of it, and I would say our sealant's a little. If you think of like the spectrum, I think we talked about this in whatever episode we talked a lot about sealant, but all the natural latex sealants are essentially natural latex liquid with some sort of like solvent, like water or it's generally water, so we'll just say water, and then like an antifreeze, right? And so it can be like an ethylene glycol or a propylene glycol or something like that. And so you end up with this mixture that is quite basic on the pH scale. Not simple, but it's high pH. And what happens is the pH has to remain high for it to remain liquid. And if it begins, the pH falls, it'll harden. And that's actually one of the reasons that people have noticed with like the SILCA sealant. If you get it on your hands and it's liquid and you put your hands under water, it hardens instantly to a film because the pH has fallen below the sort of level that it has to be at. And so that's one of the big advantages of the natural latex sealants over the synthetic. Synthetic sealants tend to be pretty neutral pH and also are like primarily water-based. And so when they get wet, the water can actually, it's a solvent for the sealant itself. And so, like getting a puncture with a synthetic sealant, it's kind of unlikely to seal. Whereas with, like our product or an orange seal, it may actually be more likely to seal in the wet than in the dry. But because of this effect. And so, just some little bit of interesting chemistry background. But what CO2 does is it acidifies, right? You think of like all this talk about CO2 in the atmosphere acidifying the oceans. When you put the CO2 into the tire, it actually goes into my brain's forgetting the word, but essentially it adsorbs, I think is the, can't ever keep it straight. I'm sure one of our listeners will correct me. But it can drop the pH of the sealant quite rapidly. And if that, exposure remains, the sealant will just sit in there getting hard. And so, it's not like it hardens instantly, but over a couple of days, the sealant really goes south. And so, that's a definite downside of the natural latex sealant products, and also a downside of the CO2 is just that natural interaction. If we could carry nitrogen canisters or argon canisters with us, you wouldn't have that effect, right? So it's not like it's just the compressed air. I know a lot of people have always said like, oh, I think it's the cold, and it's it's really none of that. It's this acidification problem.
How about propane?
I haven't honestly looked at that. They took all those big air canisters off the
That's
market
what I was asking.
years ago.
I loved the big air cans.
Yeah.
They would, they'd fill a 29-inch tire, and you can't find them anymore. Yeah. And I was wondering, would those work better with latex? Never used them back. I mean,
I'd have to look at the chemistry on that. But I know those came off the market because they were exploding in people's trunks and things.
That's a good reason.
And so, it's a pretty good reason.
So get a Tatico or a Gravelero pump. Your sealant will thank you. So will the environment. So will your trunk, it sounds like. We'd like to end the show with a dedication to a marginal gainer, I would call him. We don't know him. I don't think any of us have met him. He was Mike Burrows.
Never met him.
Yeah, Mike Burrows. He passed away recently. Mike was the inventor, I guess most notably, Josh, of the Lotus 108 bike, which Chris Boardman won the Olympic gold medal on in 1992. Now, I'm wearing my SILCA Lotus shirt here. For the folks on YouTube, you can probably see it. Josh, is this the 108 or is this the 1010? You know?
That's the 108.
That's the 108?
That's the 108. So, you can kind of always tell Mike Burrows was obsessed with single-sided fork blades and frames. And so the 108 on Hottie's shirt is the single-sided fork and single-sided frame design. Yeah, I mean, just a genius of a guy who, you look at his history of creation. I mean, he was making unbelievable like cargo bikes and family haulers, in the 80s and carbon monocoque bikes in the 80s. And, he was the guy behind the original giant TCR, the frame that kind of brought sloping top tubes to road bikes and to some sense sort of democratized pro team bikes for the masses, right? I mean, those were the first you can buy the exact bike that the team has, and there's 5 sizes and 3 sizes of seat post and 8 sizes of stem, and that's the package, and you can buy the exact bike the team is riding and not, the custom one that the other teams are riding. He just left an unbelievable imprint on the sport. And then you get into like his human powered vehicle stuff, recumbents and fared HPVs and all of that. I mean, just an unbelievable guy. I wish I had met him. I never did. But yeah, he left a mark that we will all remember for a long, long time.
There's a great retrospective on Mike's life and bicycle retailer. If you want to read that, it's not a short read, but it's worth it. I mean, you'll get at least an idea of what he meant to the bike industry, all that he brought, that is, to the bike industry. So rest in peace, Mike Burrows. Proud to wear this shirt in his honor, and proud to do the show in his honor.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Well, let's go ahead and wrap this episode. You guys, it was great seeing you in person. Great cross-promoting our other show, Leadville.fm. We'll say that one more time. 24 and 25 are the two that we mentioned in this. So 2 of the most recent episodes in there. Meantime, we have a real Ask Josh Anything episode coming up soon. Please keep your questions coming.
And here's how to do that. You can leave a comment on this or any episode at marginalgainspodcast.cc or text or call the Marginal Gains hotline, 317-343-4506. Again, 317-343-4506.
Subscribing, rating, and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts helps other questioning cyclists find us. So please give us a rating.
Yep, that's questioning, not questionable, I think. I think. So,
or both. If the rating is good, I don't care who you are. Right? Isn't that how that works?
Fair point. That is a fair point. We do not discriminate. Just give us a good rating, please. If you're looking for what platforms our show's available on, you will find links to where we are on all of them at marginalgainspodcast.cc. Your recommendation to friends is the very best compliment you can give the show, so please do so. We appreciate it.
Oof, and just talking about Leadville has caused me to lose my breath, so I think I'm going to go take a nap. Thanks to you both, and thanks to everyone for listening to Marginal Gains.